Where is he now? That was the haunting question that echoed through newsrooms, boardrooms, and the hushed corners of the internet when Harrison Sterling, America's most powerful billionaire, disappeared without a trace. He was the man whose wealth shaped cities, whose decisions moved markets, and whose legacy had been forged through decades of ruthless business strategy and public charm. People speculated everything, from secret retreats to staged disappearances, but no one imagined the truth, that Harrison had been dragged from the marble halls of his Beverly Hills mansion and dumped like trash by the very sons he had once cradled in his arms. Richard, Ethan, and Blake Sterling, the shining faces of the Sterling legacy, had grown sick of waiting. For years they had lived beneath the shadow of a man too stubborn to die, too principled to surrender control, and too foolish in their eyes to hand over the reins of the family empire. They had begged him to revise the will. They had brought lawyers to pressure him, even sent their polished lies through corporate channels to sow doubt in his decisions. But Harrison had smiled through it all, his tired hands shaking as he signed a document that sealed his real plan: to donate nearly every dollar of his vast fortune to a series of trusts aimed at uplifting the very people his sons despised: the poor, the underserved, the forgotten. His assets were already moving, buildings rezoned into shelters, private jets sold to fund public schools, and land parcels being gifted to environmental justice groups. And when his sons found out, they didn't just panic, they snapped. That sweltering July morning, they staged a family drive, loading their father into the back of his Rolls-Royce under the pretense of a relaxing outing, and took him past the limits of Beverly Hills, past the gated neighborhoods, past even the outskirts of Los Angeles, to a massive open-air landfill near an abandoned industrial zone, known only to the city's poorest scavengers. With gloves on and expressions as cold as the steel that built their empire, they lifted his frail, near-lifeless body out of the car and tossed him into a ravine of trash, a pit where rats chewed through plastic and the air itself stank of decay and old crimes. His white linen suit, tailored on Fifth Avenue, was instantly stained by oil, blood, and filth. His skin blistered under the punishing sun, and his body, already weakened by illness, trembled at every breath. But they didn't look back. Richard checked his Rolex, Ethan smoothed his cufflinks, and Blake spit into the dirt before returning to the vehicle. "This is mercy," Richard muttered. He would have wasted it. That afternoon, the Sterling brothers, dressed in custom black suits and grave expressions, held a press conference on the top floor of Sterling Global headquarters in downtown LA to announce Harrison's sudden passing due to a private health battle. Reporters wept, shareholders panicked, tributes poured in from senators, CEOs, and celebrities. But not a single person questioned the lack of a body or the fact that no funeral date had been set. No one dared challenge the golden sons of Sterling. Meanwhile, in the wastelands of refuse and heat, their father lay half-conscious, surrounded by silence and filth, his mind drifting between past and present, remembering his late wife's smile, the scent of ocean wind in Malibu, the moment he first held each of his sons, never imagining they would be the ones to orchestrate his death. The sun burned higher, the vultures circled, and still no one came. The world moved on, blind and obedient, while the real Harrison Sterling, once the man who owned half the skyline, lay discarded like a broken god in the very trash heap his empire had created. And so the question remained, whispered in the shadows by those who remembered his fire and feared his absence: where is he now? Sure to like this video, subscribe for more real stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep the fight for justice alive. What did I just see? That was the thought pounding through Malik Carter's young mind as he stood frozen at the edge of the garbage ravine, his fingers wrapped tightly around a half-crushed plastic bottle, his small chest rising and falling with rapid breaths as the scorching summer sun poured down on the rotting wasteland that surrounded him like a cruel desert made of discarded lives. Just minutes earlier, the 13-year-old had been doing what he did every weekend, wandering through South LA's massive garbage dump with a large sack slung over his shoulder, collecting bottles and scrap metal to trade for a few dollars so he and his mom could keep the lights on in their cramped one-bedroom apartment. But now, staring down into the ravine of twisted trash, Malik's eyes locked on something that didn't belong. A body, slumped, half buried in refuse, pale arms limp and bloodied, hair caked with dried sweat and filth. In a suit, once white, now blackened and torn, clinging to fragile limbs that twitched weakly with every shallow breath. Malik stepped closer, his sneakers crunching on broken glass and metal, his heart hammering louder with each step, unsure whether he was about to find a dead man or a ghost, or maybe even both. But then the body moved, barely, a flicker of fingers, a tilt of the head, a low moan that was more pain than sound. And Malik dropped his sack without thinking, sliding down the trash slope and stumbling to the man's side. "Mister?" he whispered, his voice shaking as he crouched beside the broken figure, his own calloused hands reaching out to touch the stranger's wrist. The man flinched, eyes fluttering open, just enough to reveal a spark of life behind the dirt and exhaustion. And Malik recoiled, not from fear, but from realization. He had seen this face before, countless times on magazine covers in gas stations, on TV screens playing in laundromats, on billboards above the highways he passed on the bus. Harrison Sterling, the billionaire, the legend. And now lying half dead in a pit of garbage, nothing but bones and dust. Malik didn't have time to process the madness of it all. The man was barely breathing, skin hot to the touch, lips cracked and bleeding. "Hold on," Malik said, his voice firmer now, his instincts taking over. He tore off his own shirt and dipped it into a nearby puddle of rainwater, mixed with mud, gently wiping the old man's face. Harrison's eyes flickered again, lips parting just enough to whisper, "Water?" Malik fumbled through his backpack, pulled out the half-filled bottle he'd saved from earlier, and lifted it to the man's lips, letting him sip slowly. The man choked but swallowed, and Malik's heart soared. He was alive. But not for long, not if Malik didn't move fast. With a strength no one expected from someone so small, so poor, so overlooked by the world, Malik dragged the old man inch by inch out of the ravine, his hands blistering as he climbed over metal and wire, lifting, pulling, refusing to let go even when his legs gave out beneath him. By the time they reached the edge of the dump, Malik was drenched in sweat, covered in grime, and trembling with adrenaline. He looked down at the stranger, at Harrison Sterling, and whispered, "I'm gonna get you out of here. I promise." Then, with the sun glaring down on the filth of the world, he flagged down a passing junk truck, begged the driver for help, and loaded Harrison into the back like hidden treasure. When the man refused to take them all the way home, Malik walked the final half-mile, pushing the barely conscious billionaire in a broken shopping cart, past liquor stores, gangs, and shouting neighbors, all the way to the front door of a peeling, two-story apartment building. He knocked 3 times, and when his exhausted mother, Angela, opened the door after a 14-hour cleaning shift, Malik didn't say a word. He just stepped aside, revealing the battered man slumped in the cart, and said, "Mom, we gotta help him." Why would anyone do this to their own father? That was the question Angela Carter couldn't stop asking herself as she stood barefoot in the small kitchen of their South Central apartment, her hands trembling as she wiped the sweat from Harrison Sterling's fevered forehead with a clean rag soaked in warm water and chamomile tea. Just hours ago, she had come home, expecting the usual, a pile of dirty dishes, bills she couldn't pay, and her son Malik passed out on the couch after another long day collecting recyclables. But instead, she had found a billionaire, a man she recognized immediately, despite the filth, the dried blood, and the broken expression on his face, lying limp in a shopping cart like discarded furniture, his once proud body curled up and clinging to life by a thread. Harrison Sterling, the man who built half the city, the man whose company she had once cleaned offices for, scrubbing floors while he signed billion-dollar deals in glass towers. And now here he was in her home, resting on an old mattress laid out in the corner of the living room beside the flickering TV and a stack of overdue eviction notices. Angela didn't hesitate. She didn't care that he was rich, or that he was white, or that the world might come crashing down the moment someone found out he was here. What she saw wasn't a billionaire. She saw a man left to die, a man her son had saved, She boiled soup with the last of their lentils, tore up old pillowcases to use as bandages, and gently cleaned his wounds with hydrogen peroxide she kept from a first aid kit she could barely afford. Malik hovered nearby, watching silently, his face a storm of fear, confusion, and something deeper, something angry. "He said his name's Harrison," Malik finally whispered, "and he asked me for water. That's all he said." Angela looked down at the man's fragile face, saw the crusted lips and bruised jaw, the blistered skin. "If this is who I think it is, then someone tried to erase him," she murmured. And later that night, when Harrison finally stirred again, coughing and gasping as he blinked up at the cracked ceiling above him, he whispered words that chilled Angela to her bones. "My sons, they left me. They threw me away." Malik leaned in close, his hands clenched into fists. "Your sons did this?" Harrison nodded slowly, each movement full of pain. "They want the company, the money, but I gave it away. I gave it all to the people. They found out. They said I was crazy." He coughed again, this time harder, blood dotting his lips. Angela grabbed a damp cloth and wiped his mouth, then helped him sip more tea. "I signed it over to charity," he continued, voice raw and weak. "Every last cent. I wanted my death to mean something. I wanted to fix what I broke." Angela stared at him, feeling tears prick her eyes. Not out of pity, but out of rage. She knew greed. She'd seen people step on each other for pennies. But to throw your own father into a dump and leave him to die just because he wanted to help the poor? That wasn't greed. That was evil. "We have to call someone," Malik said suddenly, his voice trembling. "They'll kill him if they find out he's alive." Angela hesitated. "If we call the police, they'll take him away. We don't know who to trust. And if the Sons own the media, they'll twist it all." But Harrison reached for her hand, gripping it with surprising strength. "Call Grayson," he whispered. "Samuel Grayson, my lawyer. He's the only one who knows. He helped me write the trust. He'll know what to do." Angela searched the inside pocket of his ruined suit and pulled out a folded card, the lettering elegant and minimal. Grayson and Wells, LPP, Beverly Hills. Malik darted to the corner where their battered landline phone sat on a milk crate, dialed the number with shaking fingers, and waited. After a few rings, a calm, older voice answered, "Samuel Grayson." Malik's voice cracked. This is Malik Carter. I found Mr. Harrison Sterling. He's alive, but they tried to kill him." Silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "Where are you?" Grayson demanded. Malik gave the address. "Don't let anyone else in. I'm sending a car now, and security." Angela hung up the phone and looked at Harrison, who was already slipping back into unconsciousness. "They left you to die," she whispered, "but you're not dead yet, and neither is Justice." Just then, outside their window, the sound of tires screeched in the distance, and Angela pulled the blinds shut, her heart pounding. The battle had begun. "Wait! If you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel." What's going on at the mansion? That was the question buzzing through reporters' radios, whispered by guards at the gate, and etched into the tense faces of every staff member who watched as 3 sleek black SUVs and 2 police cruisers roared through the wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate under the hot Los Angeles sun. It was just after noon when the chaos began, right in the middle of a carefully staged press event where Richard, Ethan, and Blake Sterling stood in front of a velvet-draped podium beneath the grand chandelier of the estate's marble foyer, preparing to unveil their new vision for Sterling Global following the tragic death of their father, Harrison Sterling. The camera crews were live, journalists scribbled notes, and their polished, rehearsed speeches spoke of legacy, honor, and moving forward with courage. Words that now rang hollow in the ears of everyone watching, because outside blue and red lights were flashing and something far more real than a PR stunt was arriving. Inside the estate, A butler dropped a tray of champagne glasses as the heavy doors slammed open and uniformed officers stepped in, followed by Samuel Grayson, the family's longtime legal advisor, and behind him, wheeled forward by a tall, broad-shouldered black security guard, was a man no one expected to see again, Harrison Sterling. He looked different than the man they remembered. He wasn't dressed in designer silk or draped in diamonds. He wore a simple dark suit, freshly tailored but modest, his silver hair neatly combed, his face still pale but fierce with determination. Silence crashed over the room like a wave as all eyes turned toward the impossible. Richard's face drained of color. Blake dropped his champagne flute, and Ethan took a step back, his mouth slightly open, caught between disbelief and terror. "Good afternoon," Harrison said, his voice steady but cold, his eyes scanning the crowd like a judge peering over a courtroom. "I believe you've been telling people I'm dead." Gasps erupted. The cameras, still rolling, captured every detail. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, but were blocked by the private guards flanking Harrison like a living wall. Samuel Grayson held up a thick leather folder and handed it to the attending detective, his voice cutting through the noise. "Officer, you'll find in these documents proof of medical neglect, forged death records, falsified company documents, and, most importantly, an eyewitness account and sworn statement detailing attempted murder by these three individuals." The detective flipped the folder open, his expression tightening as he read. "Mr. Harrison Sterling has identified his three sons as perpetrators in a conspiracy to declare him dead, assume control of his company, and inherit assets which he had legally transferred to a charitable trust before their actions." Richard tried to speak, his voice cracking. "This is insane. He's senile. He wandered off and—" "Enough!" Harrison snapped, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. His voice thundered across the room like it had in boardrooms for decades. "You threw me in a garbage pit like I was trash. You stood above me and watched me suffer. And then you lied to the world while trying to steal everything I built. But I didn't die. I crawled out, with the help of a boy far braver and purer than any of you have ever been." As he spoke, a side door opened and Malik Carter stepped into the room, flanked by his mother Angela, who looked regal despite her simple dress, her posture tall and proud. The crowd turned, cameras panned, and even the detectives paused to look at the boy who had changed the course of a billionaire's legacy. "This boy," Harrison continued, his hand lifting toward Malik, "found me, saved me, protected me when no one else would. He is the only reason I stand here today. And from this moment forward, he is my family." The officers moved in as Blake lunged, screaming curses, but he was grabbed and slammed against the marble column. Ethan tried to run, but the front doors had already been locked. Richard stood frozen, eyes hollow, as handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Reporters shouted, chaos exploded, and over it all, the legacy of Sterling shifted in an instant, not in favor of bloodlines, but of truth, of justice, of a quiet act of mercy from a boy who had nothing. As the police led the three brothers out in chains, Harrison looked down at Malik, who stood beside his chair, both fists clenched but eyes wide with wonder. "You ready to change the world with me?" Harrison asked quietly. Malik nodded, and the two of them, one scarred by power, the other shaped by poverty, turned toward the light pouring through the mansion's towering windows. Not knowing what battles still lay ahead, but certain of one thing: they had already won the war of souls. What did he leave behind? A man who once owned skyscrapers, private islands, and entire companies. What remains when the world you built is handed over to strangers and the family you raised becomes your enemy? That was the question that drifted silently through Harrison Sterling's mind as he sat on the back patio of his estate days after the arrest, gazing across the manicured lawns that now felt more peaceful than powerful, more like a resting place than a battlefield. His body was still recovering, his movements slower, his speech a little weaker. But his mind had never been sharper, and the decisions he made in those days following the confrontation would ripple through lives forever. First, he summoned every member of his charitable board, the press, and the trustees of the Sterling Trust and announced the official transfer of authority. Malik Carter, the 13-year-old boy who saved his life, would now serve as the youth co-chair of the newly renamed Sterling Carter Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar force dedicated to education, housing, healthcare, and racial equity across America. Reporters flooded the front gates as Harrison made the announcement live on national television, flanked not by billionaires or senators, but by Malik in a clean blazer too big for his shoulders, and Angela standing strong behind her son, her eyes bright with tears of pride and disbelief. Harrison introduced them as his real family now, and then made the public gasp by revealing a new will, one signed and notarized days earlier, transferring not just personal wealth, but naming Malik as a legal heir, not by blood but by choice, by loyalty, by love. Malik would inherit a trust fund with conditions for education, philanthropy, and personal growth, and Angela would become the foundation's director of community programs, given full salary, security, and a seat at every board meeting. But even as the world clapped and corporate vultures scrambled to distance themselves from the Sterling sons, now rotting behind bars awaiting trial for attempted murder and fraud, a darker truth settled in Harrison's bones. His body, though patched up, could not recover from the years of abuse, the neglect, the time spent in the heat with open wounds and no water. His organs were failing slowly, a quiet rebellion inside him. But he didn't fear death, not anymore. What he feared was dying without making sure Malik would be safe, protected, and prepared. So he taught him, not just business or politics, but how to read people, how to survive. They'd sit in the library late into the afternoons, Harrison whispering lessons about power, about legacy, about what it meant to lead with honor, while Malik listened with wide eyes and a notebook always in hand. Some days they rode through poor neighborhoods in the old Rolls-Royce, giving out food, blankets, laptops, offering scholarships to kids who looked like Malik had just a few weeks earlier. Mud on his shoes, hunger in his belly, but a fire behind his eyes. And everywhere they went, people stopped and stared. Not at the billionaire in the chair, but at the boy walking beside him. Whispers began to spread. That's the kid who saved Harrison Sterling. That's the boy who changed the game. But even as the foundation grew, as the mansion was transformed into a shelter for homeless youth, as Malik stood on stages and spoke with the wisdom of someone twice his age, Harrison began to fade. The nights got longer, the pain sharper, and one morning, just as the sun rose over the Hollywood Hills, Malik found him asleep in the garden, his face peaceful, his hand resting on the edge of a leather-bound book he had been reading aloud the night before. "Finish this story for me," was the last thing he had said. Malik didn't cry at first. He just sat down beside the wheelchair, put his head on Harrison's lap and whispered, "I will." And in that moment, everything the old man had left behind, his power, his pain, his guilt, and his hope, passed into the hands of a boy who had once walked through garbage to survive, and who now stood on the edge of something much bigger than revenge, a future. Did we do enough? That question echoed in Malik Carter's mind as the city of Los Angeles gathered beneath a soft summer sun in the courtyard of the newly renamed Sterling Carter Youth Center, once a mansion of cold wealth, now a sanctuary of change. Rows of people filled the chairs, former Sterling employees, community activists, foster children, city leaders, and journalists, all dressed in quiet respect as a black and gold banner bearing Harrison Sterling's name rippled in the breeze. A jazz band played low in the background, and at the front, a large portrait of Harrison, smiling gently, eyes alive with purpose, stood on an easel beside his empty wheelchair, now adorned with roses, candles, and letters of gratitude. Malik stood before them, taller now, the blazer fitting better, but his eyes still heavy with the weight of everything he'd lived through. Grief not just for Harrison's death, but for the childhood that had been reshaped in the heat of tragedy, betrayal, and power. "He was supposed to be my enemy," Malik began, his voice steady but soft. "A man from a world that never cared about boys like me. But when I found him, left to die in the same trash I searched for food and bottles, he didn't ask me what I had or where I came from. He just needed help, and I gave it, And from that moment, everything changed. The crowd listened in silence, eyes wet, hearts aching. Malik spoke not like a child, but like someone who had carried the weight of a broken empire on his shoulders and turned it into something human again. He taught me more in weeks than school ever did. Not just math and law, but how to fight, how to forgive, how to choose something better than revenge. When the people who share your blood throw you away and a stranger reaches out to pull you up, that's family. He paused, swallowed, and looked up toward the sky. But now he's gone, and all that's left is this, what we build with the time we have. After the ceremony, Malik walked alone through the gardens, touching the plaques on benches now dedicated to victims of poverty, violence, and neglect. People Harrison had wanted to uplift. And as the sun dipped low, turning the sky golden violet, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, flanked by assistants, and approached Malik with a contract in hand, a corporate offer worth over $1 billion, inviting Malik to merge the Sterling Carter Foundation with a new for-profit venture backed by major tech and media investors. The man smiled, thinking Malik, just a teenager, would be dazzled by the numbers. But Malik looked at the contract, then at the foundation building behind him, where children laughed, ate, and learned inside the walls once filled with greed. He shook his head. "This isn't for sale," he said, handing the contract back. "This is for the people, and the people aren't for profit." The man sputtered something about opportunity, but Malik turned away and walked back inside, his shoulders straight, his path clear. In the months that followed, Malik and Angela expanded the foundation across the country, opening shelters, schools, food banks, all under Harrison's name, but built with Malik's vision, a world where no one, no matter how poor, no matter their color, would ever be left to die in the shadows. But even in victory, there was ache. At night, Malik sometimes sat alone in Harrison's study, surrounded by books and silence, wondering if he had done enough, if he had made the pain matter. But then he'd find letters from kids he'd never met, thanking him for saving their lives, for giving them hope. And in those moments, he knew. Maybe they hadn't saved the whole world, but they had saved each other. And sometimes, that's enough.